Welcome, everybody. I think we can get started. I'm Charlotte Brody, the Vice President for Occupational and Environmental Health at the Blue-Green Alliance and the Director of Healthy Babies, Bright Futures. I want to welcome you all to today's webinar, thank Walter, Kurt, and Tom, our speakers, and introduce you to Dana Saylor, who will be moderating what I'm sure is going to be a really good hour. Dana is the National Program Manager for the Blue-Green Alliance Foundation's Building Clean program. Building Clean works to increase the use of building products that are more efficient, less toxic, and manufactured in the US. We aim to improve the physical, environmental, and economic health of communities and promote a more equitable future for all. Dana, you're up.
Great. Thank you so much, Charlotte. And, thanks for inviting me to help facilitate this important discussion today. We're excited to be joined by our three knowledgeable panelists this afternoon and want to take a moment to introduce them all. First, we have Walter Jones. Walter is the Director of Occupational Safety and Health at the Laborers Health and Safety Fund of North America and is a passionate advocate for worker health and safety. In addition to his work with the union, Walter is the chair of the Safety and Health Committee of the National Association of Building Trade Unions, sits on the American National Standards Institute A10 Construction and Demolition Standards Committee, and is a governing counselor of the American Public Health Association. Welcome, Walter. Tom Neltner. Tom is the Environmental Defense Fund Senior Director for Safer Chemicals. He leads EDF's Safer Chemicals Initiative, which focuses on removing or minimizing hazardous chemicals from products and the marketplace through cross-cutting policy initiatives. His primary focus is on food additive safety, where he promotes corporate sponsorships and advances federal regulatory efforts to improve public health and the environment, and on lead, where he works to advance legislative, regulatory, and collaborative efforts to reduce lead exposure. Welcome, Tom. And Kurt Steenhoek. Kurt began his plumbing career in 1983 and became a Colorado licensed journeyman in 1988. From 1994 to 2002, Kurt was appointed UA Local 3 Business Agent, Financial Secretary, Treasurer. He was elected business manager in 2002 until his election to his current role as an international representative for plumbing at the United Association of Journeymen and Apprentices of the Plumbing and Pipe Fitting Industry. Kurt also serves as the current project manager of the UA Water Quality Program. Welcome, Kurt. And so just before we get started on our questions here today, just want folks to put your questions in the chat, and we do have some time at the end of this presentation webinar to answer them. So without further ado, let's get started talking to our panelists today. So the first question we have is actually a two-part question. The first part of the question is the same for everyone. What brings you to this work? But then we have some specific questions for everyone. So Tom, I'm going to start with you. And, again, what brings you to this work? And, can you talk a little bit about some of the new science that's out there on the harm of adult exposure to lead?
Thanks, Dana. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Lead is a passion of mine. I've worked on lead for 25 years now and started with lead and paint. Started in Indiana trying to work to protect kids from lead and paint, from renovations, from remodeling gone wrong, from soil contamination and the like. And after a few years, it became clear that we've got to deal with drinking water too. Flint made that abundantly clear. I also work on lead in food because it's a contaminant, because it's so pervasive in the environment. It's present in food, and it's still actually added to some things like canned food, the cans. So I work on lead wherever it is, because if you've been on lead and you've worked on it, the joke is lead gets in your bones. And it really does get in your bones because the body can't tell the difference between calcium and lead, and it settles into your bones where it could come back out years later. And that's why we've focused on it. And over the years, I've always focused on it with children. We focused on the harm to children because once it gets into the blood, once it gets into the bones, but when it comes back out and gets into the blood, it goes into the brain where, Charlotte, you're the nurse, you can explain it better, but it short circuits the brain. And that causes the kind of damage that we worry most about children's development, behavioral problems and the like. But that's when that blood-brain barrier that keeps the lead out is so strong, or is weak, and it gets through. By adults, the blood-brain barrier does a pretty good job at keeping lead out of the brain. So we begin to think about all the other sources. 11 years ago, the National Toxicology Program which is part of the federal government, said that levels below 5 for children cause harm to their brain. And there is no safe level, but we see it down to 5 micrograms per deciliter. But they said the same thing about adults for kidneys. And they said at 10, it affects blood. It affects the heart, primarily hypertension. And over the years, in these past 10 years, it's become very clear through a series of outstanding studies by Bruce Lanphier and others that it contributes to death, that it gives us heart attack, ischemia heart disease. And we know the mechanism. It's not just an abstract association. We know the mechanism that lead basically hardens the arteries and it makes it less pliable. And so you're going to have a heart attack. And some of those heart attacks result in deaths. So when we talk about lead, we often think about children, but we forget about the fact that the workers who are doing renovations, those who are exposed to it on the job, are at greater risk for heart disease and at greater risk for heart attack. Earlier this month, but over the past few years, EPA has been working to quantify it. And in policymaking terms, when you quantify it, when you can say this much lead is associated with this blood lead level, which is associated with this increase of lead heart disease or heart deaths, you begin to make it real. We did that for heart disease, and we were able to show that if you look at the next 35 years of people drinking the water through a lead pipe, there's an increased risk of lead exposure and increased risk of heart disease. And the value that society would put on it is $22,000. So what we were able to show is that for every lead pipe you replace, you save society $22,000 alone on the heart disease, the reduced heart disease. And that's not counting the medical side, the treatment of heart disease. So it's big numbers, but mostly it's because there's an increased risk. One of the studies by Bruce Lanphier suggested that, or indicated that the risk is about the same as secondhand smoke. So it's significant. So that's why it's important to me, not just for kids, but as well as adults.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Kurt, same question to you, but a little bit different second half of the question. So, what brings you to this work, and, why do lead service line replacements need to be full and not partial, and what materials need to be used?
Hey, thank you very much. I appreciate being here. Thank everybody for their time of jumping on today. What brings the UA to the table is, it goes back to our motto of the plumber, and the UA is that the plumber protects the health of the nation, right? Everybody's heard that, or at least everybody in construction has. And the UA has been in existence since 1889 and dealing with water and water quality and everything around water, good water in, bad water out. The UA is made up of the following. So the UA has 360,000 members in the United States and Canada. We invest over $250 million per year in training. And if you take a look at that in 4 years, that's $1 billion. So bringing $1 billion to the table to train our folks on all sorts of plumbing and mechanical is really important. We have over 300 training centers to get this done, to bring this to the field. Every year we train, in the summer, we bring 2,000 instructors to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and we train the trainer right there. And so our level to be able to bring this and any training that we have and certifications to our instructors that brings it to the members comes through Ann Arbor, Michigan to train the trainer there. And then it goes out to our field, to our 300 different training centers. Since Flint, Michigan crisis, the UA has developed a UA water quality program. This water quality program, it had to be looked at from the UA's perspective and say, where do we belong in this, and where should we lie? So we developed this program not just on the lead. And one thing we say is, don't let the lead take the oxygen out of the room, because there's more to it. We train on dealing with metals, which is lead, and we train on bacteria, and then we also train on the chemicals of concern. And with this training, we brought a certification program to the table, which certifies our contractors. There's a 4-hour certification training for the contractors on the basic fundamentals of this. And then there's 12 hours for each craft. So the plumber, the HVAC technician, and the sprinkler fitter all are at the table on this UA water quality program. UA water quality program, it brings out and it utilizes and trains people to utilize the best materials and the ones that are approved by the local ALJs, which is the authority having jurisdiction that approves the materials for every city, state, and or whatever is being utilized in the plumbing code. We also use at our instructor training program for the lead line service replacement, we train to the OSHA standards that would apply to this. We train to the ditch safety that would apply. We train to lead on general awareness. We train to lead line replacement best work practices. We train to trench safety, general awareness, and then our contractors, which is the Mechanical Contractors of America, they train to have the competent person for this work and help navigate from the employer side as well. So our spectrum on all this work and the training that gives us our opinion that we say, and what we'd like to point out, and I'd like to point out today, is that, we like to be able to have the lead line replacements from the main where the water is sourced in the street and all the way to what would be to the faucet or to the end user or to the home, because just replacing a portion of that we don't think is the competent way. And so from soup to nuts there, if you take and replace them lines from the main and then do the right filtering systems and put those in with the right folks so that we can monitor that and make sure that the source to the people is the best it can be. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you so much, Kurt. And then finally on to you, Walter. What brings you to this work, and why does lead service line replacement if you do it right, why does it have to be mandated from the top?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm a director of occupational safety and health for the laborers. I'm a certified industrial hygienist. And the one thing, besides asbestos, lead is the only other chemical health hazard that the public actually understands and buys into. And that's why we're here. I'm speaking mainly to be concerned with worker protection. The beauty of what I'm seeing here with this lead line replacement, it's an actual green job for a change that isn't whitewashing. It's a job where they're actually creating a greener, better environment. And the other great thing about lead line replacement from a union perspective, it provides a green job that does just transition. Not putting my guys out of work in favor of some technology or somebody behind a desk. We are still able to get involved in the community. So it's a really big time green job that we like to support and see more effort goes to it. And then of course the stuff that Kurt talked about and Tom talked about in terms of lowering the health risk to the public is of vital importance. In terms of where this all should begin, as Tom pointed out, and the laborers as well, we provide massive amounts of training to workers. And whenever we talk about these new initiatives, the one thing everyone seems to always get behind is the idea that we must train workers. We have to make sure that all the workers are trained. And in my experience, we can have all the trained workers we want, but if management and ownership isn't providing the resources so that these folks can work safely, then it's all moot. So we have to make sure, as we fight for wider application of lead line replacement across the country, that we in this primarily cities as the owner we have to make sure that they're also speccing in to these contract bids that this work is done with a PLA. That way we could have fair wages and union access. And we have to make sure that they're speccing in the requirement to ensure safety on these jobs. Construction is the one of the number one hazardous industries. To do the service line replacement, you have to build trenches. This year, we're probably going to have the highest number of trench fatalities ever. I'm not attributing this to lead line replacement, but it's one of those tasks that doesn't seem to be in compliance with OSHA rules as we like to see it. It's too many times you walk by a trench and you can barely see someone's head popping out the top, and there's no protection in there. We will double the number of fatalities in trenches. There are also other construction hazard issues that we want to not lose sight of as we put more workers into these environments. The infrastructure bill is going to bring scores of new workers to construction, many of which have never been there. They're going to take a while to get their skill level up and their safety training up. And we fear that if we don't make sure that these owners are speccing in PLAs and speccing in safety requirements from the beginning and making sure they're getting contractors that understand safety from the top, and it filters down when they meet the level of training that Tom and my members are provided with, which is standard OSHA 10 training to understand most of the construction hazards, as well as in areas that are providing this service, there's a lean toward also exposing the trainees to lead hazards and what they need to do to protect themselves. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. That's kind of what I want to look at. And I'm, like I said, I'm encouraged that we finally have a green job here that is also a just transition job. And we like to see more of this.
That's great. Thank you. And that actually leads us into our next question here, Walter, which is what must be included in lead service line replacement if we're going to make it safe and healthy? And I'll throw it back to you quickly, Kurt. See if you can answer that question for us too.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. I appreciate it. Good job, Walter. I think that some of the points there really hit home, and I know that you're very passionate about it, and we appreciate, being at the table with the laborers on these projects. I think one key point is when we do PLAs and we do work alongside with the laborer and the operator, that's a real trifecta right there. And I think if we're all working together on some of these projects, that's really the key for success, right? Bringing the right people to the table with the right training. And I think that's really important. I think another thing that's important to mention, and maybe mention a couple of times because it's worth repeating, is the relationships and the partnerships that we have in the different cities and counties with the water purveyors. And I know that we have a lot of work that we're working with on American Water in a lot of cities and states, and we have some contracts with them. And when we do have the relationships with the water purveyor, we're all working together to get the right thing done. And I think that's really important. So training in the lead safety, including for us, the ASSE certified contractors and technicians, the ASSE 12,000 series, we feel like that's really important. And they've done a lot of research in that. And that brings, the trucks, the tools, and the technicians to the job site with the proper training from the UA side. Lead line awareness training, that's really important to have, understanding the federal and the laws in the states as far as handling these materials and doing it proper and safe and disposing of the materials safely. That is super important, and we do a lot of individual training on that where we do these lead line replacements. The second thing I think in that same line is lead exposure risks. You know, it's important for the worker to understand where the risks are and how to handle those properly. And then along with that line as well is the lead health risk and protecting the worker, you know, and handling those materials, you know, from the ditch or from, you know, the home and disposing those properly and bagging them up properly and getting those there. You know, and then I also will reiterate again is when we do these jobs, we want to make sure that we are doing the full spectrum. So we're replacing, you know, every bit of lead that we can, putting the filters in correctly and the right filters, and then coming back and monitoring that quality of water once that filtering process is done. You know, it's really, really important to you know, be able to protect not only the worker working in it, but, you know, the people at the end of the day that have these lead lines come into their homes and their businesses, that we've done the job right and that we did reduce the lead. Now it's really the key factor right there is protecting the health of everybody involved in the process.
Great, thanks, Kurt. And Walter, I'm going to take it back to you. You know, you talked about trenching already. You know, are there other things that must be included in lead service line replacement if we're going to make it safe and healthy? Can you expand on a little more?
Yeah, we're more or less. I'll finish off with what we were talking about before. Again, like as Tom pointed out, we need to make sure that this is PLA work so that it's a level playing field for the really good contractors that are not going to skirt on safety to make a profit. I'm not trying to talk badly of some contractors, but we know when we have projects like this where they have a PLA, they will definitely have the opportunity at least provide minimum requirements of safety. So that's where we need to begin. And I agree with Kurt again that the training, what we provide training to all our apprentices that eventually comes out and do this work. In most of the large cities where this is being done, these cities already require OSHA 10 and sometimes OSHA 30 requirements, which is unusual outside of some of these places. So we know that the workers will be trained at least to work safely. But if their boss and their supervisor isn't reinforcing that, that's how the ball gets dropped, where we're worried about turning productivity and protecting one another. It's just, this is, a lot of this is going to be on infrastructure money. You know, I'm hearing 20 billion nationally almost on some of this stuff. So we do have it's not like it's a cost issue anymore. It's do we have the will to do the right thing to protect the workers? So I think that's really what we need to think about. We also probably need to think more about, remember that, you know, I'm an industrial hygienist, and the OSHA requirements of lead exposure is probably not going to be in play in these projects. You got to have a blood lead level of 50 to 60 deciliters per micrograms per deciliter in your blood to really get pulled off a project, and you got to have like 30 milligrams to get in your blood to get pulled into some of these safety requirements of OSHA, and you got to have even the personal exposure level for lead is 50 and micrograms per cubic meter, and you're just not going to reach OSHA requirements by this process. You'd reach it if we were cutting lead paint with a torch. So technically, it's not going to be a lot of OSHA involvement with this idea of protecting the workers from lead. That doesn't mean we need to lay down on the issue. We need to look at the public health departments on this issue. Public health departments look at it totally different, and NIOSH and CDC is joining them, whereas 5 micrograms per deciliter of lead in your blood is considered elevated. As Tom was mentioning earlier, and he may just jump on about this later when it's his turn, that's considered elevated. And as you compare it to OSHA, where you got to be up to 50 to 60 to even get pulled off a work site, we need to look at, letting the public health departments have a role here and making sure this is being done correctly. And then working with my union and Tom, we need to look at administrative, because there's not gonna be a respirator used and these types of things. We gotta look at administrative work practices to reduce exposures. And I won't say simple things, so that's misleading, but it's making sure when we're blowing these lines, these replacement lines through the old lines and pulling the lead lines out, creating these plumes of dust, that workers are trained to be upwind and not downwind. That we're looking at using nitrile gloves and making sure that we have a change area. So, because the lead is gonna make it to the truck, it's gonna make it home, it's gonna make it to the locker room very, very easily. Lead gets on your hands, it doesn't really wash off with soap and water. We're learning that it takes, as Tom was talking about, it loves hanging out with bone and fat. It just sticks there, and it stays there forever. Basically, I have a brother who had, chewed on lead paint in our home many, many moons ago, and he's a late onset dementia because of this. I was telling the folks before, one of the worst phone calls I've ever gotten was from a worker who called us up. That was his words were, I'm going crazy because of my lead exposure from demo work, and what can you do for me? And my response was, all I can do is go in and correct every problem in the workplace today so that no one else gets overexposed. But there's nothing I could do for you. You have to see a lawyer. And the lawyer said to him that he doesn't have a case. And it was a really tough few minutes after he said that. So we don't want to get to that level. We don't want to get, I don't think we'll have that problem with lead line replacement, but we really have to make sure we institute practices so that these things no longer occur.
Thanks, Walter. And Tom, your thoughts here is kind of a good segue to you and maybe what some of you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, Walter and Kurt, I'm so glad you guys are out there doing this work. I've been in Indiana working in the field and working with kids that are lead poisoned. And I can tell you so many times when we worked with training plumbers and contractors, mostly renovators, and they would say, I'm complying with OSHA. And OSHA's rules were written in the early 90s. They haven't been updated. They don't reflect all the science we've learned. So while they may not have been good enough then, they're clearly not good enough now. And one of the ways we've been able to communicate it is, I would take a dust wipe and just wipe down, the steering wheel. I would wipe down the seat belt. I would wipe down the seat on the car where they drive their kids, or the car seat in the back where this was their work truck. And then we would find huge levels where their kids were exposed. It was on their clothes that they took at home. Those weren't union contractors. Those were the contractors that are, on home renovation, are not in that system that Walter and Kirk has to make sure that they're protected. So this is really about making sure that the standards are followed by everybody, that the kinds of training that Walter and Kirk, your organizations give are available for everybody, and that we ensure actual compliance. It's so important. And one aspect is that while people tend not to, they just think they're resilient to lead. I was exposed to that when I was a kid at higher levels. Well, yeah, look at me and you got the answer. So we can be so much better and we can do it, but sometimes phrasing it around kids and it's take-home lead makes a difference. One of the aspects where I think we can all do better is on flushing. So even if you do full replacement, and Kurt, I am all for you. Let's do it. Let's save money and replace it all at once instead of having multiple people touch it. And what we often forget is that even if we do a full replacement, the levels go up. There's a spike. There's some caught in the filter at the outlet, the little screen at the end of the faucet, or they just go up because you've disturbed some lead and you've disturbed the pipe. If you're doing part of the pipe, the lead goes way up. And if you're just disturbing it, like disconnecting it, moving it out of the way, as some utilities do, you'll still have increases. So we need to make sure we flush that line out. And that flushing, there's a proper procedure to do it. And that we can do it where you open up and you let as much water flow as you can to clean out the system. You want to flush it down the drain. And then you need to put filters on. Conceptually, I don't think a lot of residents can do that without the plumber, the contractor, the person who's doing the work, who's coming in the home to work on that, making that connection, emphasizes to them how important it is to get that done. Frankly, I think the person who does that work should be doing the flushing. Set it up. And then you need to put filters on. There was a study in Denver where they do this really well, where there are people that just don't get how to put the filters on the end of the faucet, and they need help. So a simple act that's easy for the kind of talent of the guys going in for the jobs can do, that if we get the filter on wrong and they don't understand how it's used, we could end up with pretty high levels of exposure. So flushing by the people who know best, just setting it up, taking that as part of the job, and then also making sure the filter is installed right would do so much good in reducing the exposure and reassuring both the parents in those homes. The other part that's important for us to realize is that as we do this, we want to go systematically. We want to be able to replace all of it. It's nice to be able to prioritize the whole neighborhood. And when you do that, you got to recognize that people trust people from their neighborhood. Newark, New Jersey has replaced all of their lead pipes. I think they had 22,000. They did it over 2 or 3 years. And what they did is they hired people from the neighborhoods and they trained it and tried to give them, it's a job career scope. And Walter, you're right, that by helping them get these basics down, they can develop a whole new career and a job that helps us down the line. So we've got to hire people from the neighborhoods. If you want to succeed on this, because you're going into people's homes, they got to look like people from the neighborhoods. So we need to do more of that work. And to the extent that we can, we're going to be more successful in protecting both the workers, the supervisors, the customers, which includes the parents and the children. And we don't want to forget rental property. A lot of this is done owner-occupied first because there's somebody there who can be responsible. But the biggest risks are often in the rental property, where there's more children. One pipe can expose 4 homes, 4 or 5 homes or more. And so if you get that one pipe replaced fully, you end up protecting more children, more units, and it could be done more sustainably. The challenge is, how do you get the owner to cooperate? And that's often a challenge. And again, Newark led the way in saying the resident can grant permission, that we don't have to wait for an owner, an absentee landlord, to find the way to grant permission to do something that makes all of the tenants safer in the long run and reduces the risk of leakage in the long run. So those are my suggestions. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Tom. And that leads us, sort of into our next question, and you've already all of you sort of dabbled in this already, is, what must be included in the training for lead service line replacement? And Walter, I'm going to go back to you, and specifically, what does LIUNA include that everyone doing lead service line replacement needs to know, and how do we get more people trained?
Well, that's the universal question that we're learning in construction right now, recruitment and retrenching. We got more bodies to fill the work, so that's where every meeting I go to is the topic of the number one topic of concern. Now, as we were saying earlier, our training provides general construction skills training. So we teach our apprentices, and these folks go through a 3 to 6 month process of just apprenticeship training where they're learning general construction skills. Now, we do I'm sure others do as well, but we do something differently. We don't teach them safely. We integrate safety into skills training so that's seen as being seamless. So, and you know, a lot of times I'll get out in the field and find out that, oh no, because this project is, you know, in Boston, we're going to do it this way. But if we're in the suburbs of Boston, we're going to do it differently. And that's when they learn, like, oh, you know, skills and safety is separated out in the field. But in our training, we try to integrate safety requirements right into the skills training, PPE requirements, best practices. Because, you know, it's one thing to be involved with the minimum requirements of OSHA, which is just the floor upon which we stand on. Construction best practices have to be employed as much as possible. And we can only, as we do our training, we try to integrate that into the basic apprenticeship training. So I think that, as I mentioned earlier, the OSHA 10 has got to be part of this. As much as we're talking about lead, construction hazards, you know, 25% of fatalities in construction are and workplaces come from construction. You know, trenching and falls are, you know, struck by are the number one, you know, one of the top 4 causes of fatalities in construction. So injuries as well. So I'm thinking we really have to look at this holistically and not piecemeal. And the only way that we could do this is if the owner, you know, specs out a project that ensures that the contractor is qualified to comply with these general rules and best practices.
Great, thank you, Walter. And now, you know, Kurt, similar question to you. You know, what does UA include that everyone doing lead service line replacement needs to know, and how do we get more people trained?
Yeah, thank you. You know, as I said before, we have our training in Ann Arbor, Michigan, where we bring all of our instructors to train the trainer, and having these you know, these important items that come up as we did when we seen the Flint, Michigan crisis. We developed our training program, and then being able to bring enough people together to bring that back out to the field. So we do have, you know, some regional training where we can get a lot of folks in an area that can be trained, and then they can go out and train the apprentices and the journey people. And included in this, which is really unique for us, is we actually train the contractor at the same time. So the contractor comes to the union hall, and when we looked at water quality falling Flint, we decided we needed to be able to have this fundamental class for the contractor, because it's that important, right? So it's that dynamic, and you know, Walter, I think you talked about the holistic approach, and we saw that as a holistic approach, because we first went into Flint and everybody was talking about, hey, when they reverse the water in the river, they you know, they expose the lead, and then we found out that, hey, that there's a whole lot more than that. It's not just lead, it's Legionella, and it's other things that are hurting our folks and the end users. So the holistic approach, bringing that down to every training center. So when we disseminate that through 300 different training centers, you know, we have the ability to train people up pretty fast. And so within about a 12-month period, we are able to touch every one of the 360,000 folks to the codes and standards that are important that we bring to the table on this.
Great, thanks so much, Kurt. And finally, Tom, you know, similar question to you. You know, what else should be included? What are we missing? And again, how do you think we can get more people trained?
Well, you know, there's $15 billion that Congress provided to utilities to get to states who get the utilities to provide to get this money done right. But Walter, you hit it when you said you're going to need to have good, and Kurt too, you need to have contract specs that make it clear who needs to do the work and what the training is required. That if you leave it ambiguous, the lowest bid may not be somebody who's taking care of the trenches, or taking care of all those safety concerns, or taking care of the lead properly. So I think it really comes down to water utilities, who are handling most of this money, to writing good specs to make sure it's being done right.
That's great. Thank you for all of your thoughtful responses to these questions today. I know we have a few that have come into the Q&A, and I think Charlotte's going to lead us off in getting some of those questions answered.
So I'm going to do the best job I can with these questions to try to put them together in a more efficient way. But there, Donald Farrell asked a couple of questions which are about adult exposure. So one, I guess, Tom, this is for you. Is there some kind of clearinghouse or one place where you can find all of the science about the harm of adult exposures? And then should adults be encouraged to have their blood lead levels tested? Is there some age where it doesn't matter anymore?
I always miss that unmute button. So there isn't a site yet. There is CDC focuses on children, and it's not yet paying enough attention to adults. There is an adult blood lead monitoring program. It's called ABLES that most states have. So there's a CDC site. So Walter, you might be able to weigh in on that. NIOSH may have some. As far as testing on blood lead, you know, Walter and Kurt, you guys are the pros, but that is a really important tool because OSHA monitoring isn't sufficient. But however, you know, you generally, the best place is to do the safe work practices so it doesn't even need to come up, and avoid the exposures and reduce those exposures using those work practices that you described, Walter.
Yeah, I would agree. You know, the blood lead level testing, I as an industrial hygienist, I like to prevent folks from getting lead in their blood at the front end instead of worrying about how much they got in there so that we can get them off to work. So if we put controls in place, you know, that we should be at the front end preventing exposures. And yeah, the ABLES programs is out there, but there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's a conflict between public health requirement of blood lead levels and an OSHA requirement of blood lead levels and exposure. And it you know, like I say, you know, in the case of like you're over elevated you got 5 micrograms per deciliter, so you're you have elevated level, but that doesn't mean a hell of beans in terms of a contractor in terms of OSHA.
Right.
Wait, there are a couple of questions that are really about the details of what it means to completely replace a lead service line. So I wondered, Kurt, if you could lead us off in just what's going on when you replace a lead service line, and more specifically, are there temporary pipes? Is there any reason why there would be a different contractor for the street part and the private property part?
You bet. That's a great question, Charlotte. You know, I think if you take a look at where the main is in the street, where it supplies to the neighborhoods, there's generally, you know, a curb cock there that, and some folks take a look at it and they say that we're just going to replace what is responsible for the water purveyor, and the water purveyor in different areas may have the responsibility to the meter, to the street or to the sidewalk. But I think the important thing that I've been trying to hammer home today is that there is a different responsibility. But if you take a look from that main, you go through and you replace the lead all the way through the curb cock or through the meter and then into the home. So if you just stop short and then you leave you know, portions of that still being lead and inside the home where it transitions to another material, you know, that's the important part. And sometimes inside the home it becomes responsible of the local building department, and then you may have other permits and permitting required there. So you know, I think the important thing is understanding the full system, all the way from that main to the faucet. And sometimes even where we've had older faucets that had lead in them, you know, we've done a lot of good replacements, and those are The new faucets don't have them, but some people don't realize that some of their fixtures too have a high lead content, and that needs to be looked at 100%, in my opinion.
I know, Kurt, that there's a really good video of the UA local. Is it in Milwaukee?
It is, yes.
They actually go into the street and show how the line is replaced.
That's correct. Yeah, UA Local 75 out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Yeah, I'll try to find that while the next question is asked and put it into the chat, because
nice.
It really helped me.
That gives a good visual. That's great.
Great. Here's Tom is putting in the CDC websites, so I think that the next questions were really about training. That if I decide tomorrow that I really want to get a job replacing lead surface lines, how do you go about getting trained? If you want to be one of those people that's going to fill the gap, Walter, that you talked about.
I think Tom laid it out pretty good as well. But what in our programs, you'd have to be a card carrying member, so you'd have to go to the local union hall and apply to be a laborer, and you would express what interests in construction you're more interested in, heavy highway versus residential versus general, and they will then package up a training program for you to match where either one the jobs are or what your interests are. And this is why, as Tom pointed out, we have to spec this work out. If we know that there's going to be $100 million project in this city, that means now the locals will begin to fill the bench of folks that can do that work, so that when our signatory contractors begin to bid on this work and they need they go from having 12 people to needing 30 people, that they have a bench to pull on to go do that work. So the first place, in my opinion, you would need to go is to get your union card and get ready for all this work. And there's a ton of work coming. I would encourage anybody that can pass a drug test to you're guaranteed 15, 20 years of work, 6-figure work with some of the best employers in construction for the next 20 years, I'm sure. So it's out there, and you're going to get the training.
AWWA with.
All right. That was my cue to be quiet.
So Deborah Levy clarified her question. Do you see it in the chat, Kurt, that it's not just that it's two different contractors, it's that they're doing it at different times.
So yeah,
one contractor is replacing the street part, and a different contractor is doing the portion between the curb stop and the house. So it happens at two different times. So it's sort of two partial replacements. Does that lead to increased risk, and why would they do it that way?
I
think it depends.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it depends on the local and what is being mandated, right? So the lines of territory, if you will, who has the responsibility is kind of where it lies. I think, and following up a little bit on Walter's answer to the last question, is we do have a lot of states across the country that are requiring schools and other areas to take care of lead and get it out of the schools as well. And so some of those contracts will, and the legislation will say you have to use local people. And so local people and, diversified people is in some of those requirements. So the ability for them to come to the local union and join the local and work in their area and do this work and work at home and not bring in people that are, out of the area. I think there's opportunities for local folks in local areas based on some of those requirements. for the opportunities. That's just another final point I'd like to put on that for the jobs.
Good points. I wanted to get the risk issue, and that is every time you disturb a pipe, there's a significant risk that you're going to release particulate, and the person's going to get increased exposure. So, and it's enough that when EPA's rules that go into effect in October 2024, they require that every time you even turn off the valve, every time you disturb it in any way, you have to notify the residents so that they can do the flushing and the filtering as they feel best. And those are good steps. That's for that reason, it makes no sense to disturb the pipe twice. If you do the job, finish the job. To do part of the pipe and then come back later is not only wasting money, but it's also risking increased exposure. I don't know from a contracting standpoint why they have two different crews do it, but you only want to touch that pipe once. As my father, who's a carpenter, said, you know, measured twice, cut once. On this one, it's touch the pipe once, the lead pipe once, so you can reduce that exposure.
Great. Yeah, thank you for all those great questions, folks in the audience, and for these wonderful answers from our panelists. Just wanted to, give everyone a few seconds to make some final comments. Walter, I'll start with you. Oh, you're muted.
I'll just start by saying thank you for the opportunity to talk about worker safety on this important environmental issue. It's about time that the environmental and the labor group get together to fight some of these issues together. And I look forward to more of this, because I think this is a great opportunity to show that labor and environmentals, we do have the same goals in mind, and that's sustainability of people.
Excellent point. Kurt, what about you?
Hey, I've got a couple of final thoughts. I think understanding the crisis is really, really important. I think also understanding and following and help follow the funding, right? So whether it's federal or state funding, or working with your local utilities, like what we do with American Water. And so in some areas where, they really support getting 100% of the lead out, which we really appreciate their approach to it. And then, if you utilize the right workers, you utilize the right codes, the right materials, and the licensed and certified and trained contractors, that's a real big, for us. And I think that's really important, and then we'll go back to the UA saying is we're protecting the health and safety of the public. And, we really have to look out for the next generation. And I'll throw one in there for Shar is, protecting the healthy babies and the healthy families. And that's really, really important to us, because having, protecting that next generation is where we're all going, and it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely, Kurt. Tom, I'll let you have the last words here.
Well, and Walter, I think you nailed it, and Kurt as well. But the idea that this is an area for great collaboration, and that's why it's really important to have groups like Blue Green Alliance, Dana, working together to try to find ways to do that communication, to make sure that we get those efforts aligned. So I really appreciate, Dana, you as a moderator with the Blue Green Alliance, where you're sort of dedicated to try to figure out how to work the unions and the environmental groups. And when we talk about environmental groups, we need to be thinking about health. And that's where Charlotte with Healthy Babies, Bright Futures comes in. You put a lot of work into convening this and getting the word out. This is not about, that's about kids. Most infants and babies aren't union workers yet. They will be, but we need to make sure that really appreciate your work, because we want to protect not only your constituency, Charlotte, but we want to protect all the parts, including adults. And too often we forget about adults and lead, on how vulnerable they are, because in my mind, dying is pretty important and nobody wants to do that. And when lead increases that risk, even if it's just a little bit, like secondhand smoke, it's still important enough that we need to deal with it. So thank you for holding this, Charlotte, and thanks, Dana, for making it happen. And Kurt and Walter, I really do look forward to continuing to work on this.
So Dana, we're being asked to sort of reintroduce the speakers briefly one more time at the end.
Oh boy, but go back to the, okay, no problem. Let's see.
I think the specific question was where do we come from, right?
Yeah, sure. I'll let you go ahead, Kurt. I'll let you
Yeah.
explain. Like,
Yeah, so
in the bios.
I was born and raised in Denver, Colorado, and a native of Colorado. So, you know, that's where my home was. I was a local plumber there and a local business manager in the union there for 25 years. And now I currently work for the United Association. And I'm from Florida in the winter and Denver in the summer. So that's a short bit. Yeah, thanks.
I read it a little differently. I'm from the laborers. I'm the director of occupational safety and health. I'm an industrial hygienist, and I have been doing this in this field for, man, I don't want to, 25, 30 years now. Started at Mount Sinai out in New York City, did a stint with the Teamsters here in Washington, and now here with the laborers for the last 20 years. I don't hang pumps anymore. I'm more of a policy wonk than anything else. But that's where I'm at. I'm a New Yorker I can't even call it my home anymore. I lived here long and I've lived anywhere.
And my name's Tom Neltner. I'm a senior director in the Healthy Communities program at the Environmental Defense Fund. Been working on lead for about 25 years when I was in Indiana and realized how big the problem was. But I'm a Midwesterner, born in Kentucky, raised in Ohio, and I count myself as a Hoosier. I'm a chemical engineer and an attorney.
For making that a lot easier.
That's who they are. Thank you, everybody. Recording will be published, and we'll send it out to everybody who registered for the workshop. Thank you so much. And thank you to Kyra and Namoff from Healthy Babies, Bright Futures, who put all 4 of these webinars together.
Yes, thanks, Kyra.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks for inviting me.
Bye-bye.
Bye.